Good afternoon. This is Ron Brown. It's Friday, July 10th, 2026. There's about 2 hours left in the trading day, so I thought I would go ahead and do my video and make use of my time so I don't have to do this on the weekend. Anyway, what I'm going to do today, or what I'm going to show you today, I'm going to do more of the introductory charts for new users just to help them get started with ACSI. I've added a new chart. It's a base chart, and I'll show that to you here in a couple of minutes. And I'm going to be using uh, user smart groups that are generated, contextual trends, and I'll explain that as I get into the video. As always, the market is your teacher, and any stock index or ETF mentioned in this presentation is not a recommendation to buy or sell. All trading strategies are used at your own risk. When you open up charts in HGSI, my standard charts are down here, but these introductory charts are up here. As I mentioned in the last video, I'm putting this together to help people get started with HGSI because it really is overwhelming if you're a newbie or just trying to use the program. So I'll explain why I am doing this sequence and the advantages of each of the charts. So the new chart I added, I just slipped it in here. It's 00 daily. It's a blank chart, end of day. The support and resistance are invisible. If you want to see the support and resistance, you just edit the indicator, go to support and resistance, and rather than invisible, you just make it visible by select. I use the dotted lines, and then you can see where support is based upon the zigzag indicator and where resistance is. Support is blue, resistance is red. This is a grocery stock. They own King Soopers in Denver and a lot of stores around the country. I just happen to have the chart up. Let's take a look at Microsoft. So to leave these on here, it calculates the support and resistance for you automatically based upon these parameters. Number of lines 4 and sensitivity is 2. So whenever there's a 2% change, that is where a new support or resistance line will be drawn. For example, down here at the bottom, here's support, and that appeared after the stock moved up 2% from the low or the pivot point here. Now, I'm going to turn these off for now. Just make them invisible. Just to clean this up. And I want to point out something in this base chart. If we look up here at the top, you'll see support, resistance, optimism, pessimism, volatility, and volume spikes. These are all things that you could or probably should look at before you take a position. Now where I got this is I finally sat down and read Tyler Bullhorn's book. He is the producer of the Stock Scores website up in Canada, and he's been trading for a long time. He's very successful, and these are the factors that he looks at. He doesn't use indicators other than volume, and he looks for support, resistance, optimism, pessimism, volatility, and volume spikes. So let's just use this chart. I've got Microsoft up here right now. So if we were drawing our support lines, recently, there's support, and currently, here's resistance. Now this is very short-term support and resistance. If you went to the weekly chart, you could draw support and resistance. You get a totally different picture. You can see, obviously, where the support here. When you draw a line on here, if you want it straight, click on your Shift key, and it'll straighten it out for you. So you can clearly see where longer term support and resistance are for Microsoft. Now I'm going to jump back to that blank chart. I'll just leave the support and resistance up here. You see how much clearer support and resistance are on the weekly chart for Microsoft at least, but you can do either one. Now, if I were to extend this trend line here, to do that, I would click on this. I had to click on the line again. It didn't give me both ends unless I click directly on the line. I'm going to hold my Shift key down, and then you can see how you can draw these lines further out once they've been put on there. So it's just this tool right here. And if you want to get back to the original trend line, just click on that. Not the most intuitive part of the program, but it's possible to draw these lines if you want to. So let's get back to this. I'm just going to go ahead and get past this support and resistance. Now, what's optimism and what's pessimism? How do market participants feel about a stock? Well, it's pretty easy if you look over the longer term. And let's bring that tool back up. See if I can do this. This is obviously pessimism. And here's optimism. Here is, I would say, neutrality, where it's in a congestion area, short-term optimism, and then back to pessimism. And we bounced off of support, of the stock bounced off of support. We're starting to see a little bit of optimism here, but really not that much. Here we had a big volume spike on this candle right here, but notice this, as it's tried to rally, the interest has really fallen off on Microsoft. So I would say there's not a great deal of optimism right now. I think pessimism still dominates, but if this volume happens to pick up and we get past this short-term resistance, then it would be more optimistic. Now, another thing Tyler Bullhorn talks about is volatility. If a stock is really volatile, like in here or here, that means there is no agreement about the value of the stock. When you start getting into really tight areas like up here, there is much more of an agreement on the value of the stock. It broke out, but it failed. But there was some agreement here. And I'll look at some other charts, see if we can find something else. And then his final thing is he looks for, he calls it unusual activity. I call them volume spikes. What that means is that there is new information that's come into a stock, and it will more often be shown as a volume spike. And this one really hasn't carried through much, but you can see the unusual activity. Going back here, you can see the unusual activity too. And on this right here, this was on the gap down. So what was being optimistic or optimism for a while just changed immediately to pessimism because new information had entered the market about this stock. Now I'm going to get rid of all these just by clicking on clear all annotations and everything is gone. So anyway, I think he's really got some good ideas here. If you just look at a chart rather than a bunch of indicators, you can analyze where support and resistance are. If the consensus is optimism or pessimism, if there's a lot of volatility, you can see right in here, it's pretty stable in here, but when the volatility picks up, you really need to be aware of that. And then, of course, the volume spikes. Now let's go to a different stock. I'm in something called the micro trend up. By the way, I want to show you this. If I go into the designer, I've created these smart groups under contextual trends. There's a micro trend, a short trend, intermediate trend, long trend, and primary trend. These three are used in the charts here. Long term, I just kind of added that. It pulls up a few stocks, but the primary trend, these are stocks that have the fan in place and all the other short-term, intermediate, and micro trends are also up. So you can come down here and use these, or you can use these same filters if you go to category number 24, and here's the micro trends, the short-term trends, intermediate trends, and long-term trends, primary trend up. These have the fan up, and let's see here, if I scroll over here to the right, EMA fan uptrend, it'll say yes on all of these. Now I haven't looked at these. Let's just take a look at a chart here. Here's WW Granger, and I'll make it full screen here. Now you can tell, obviously, that this is a stock showing a great deal of optimism. But let's go in here and let's look at past support. I don't want that one. I want this one. Past support, and here was resistance on that. You can see the resistance went through here, but when it broke through that, and here is some unusual volume activity right in here. Put a crosser on here. And you can see this big volume spike came upon a pretty narrow range day. So somebody's buying in here, and they're buying here, and they're selling here. You can see where they're selling. You can see where they're buying. Now looking here, you can see that the bars are small where the buyers and sellers were pretty much in agreement because there wasn't a lot of movement. Then the volatility picked up, and then it was pretty volatile through this period, and then a big gap down. And this was generally pessimism. I didn't mean to do that last one. I'll just clear them all out here. So here to here, or let's just take it down to here. There's nothing precise about this. It's just getting a feel for a chart. This is pessimism, and it suddenly turned to optimism in here up to this point, and then it turned into pessimism again, and then optimism. Now let's go down Here you can see the big volume spike right there. You can see the big volume spike. This is unusual activity or volume spikes. Now when you get into an area, I'm going to draw a box here, like this, where there's a lot of volatility, it means that there isn't consensus on price between buyers and sellers. But when you get an area like this, which is not as volatile and is really kind of directionless, then there is more of an agreement. And then, of course, we get the big move up on earnings, looks like on earnings. And now the optimism becomes apparent as this stock continues higher. You can see this is a very expensive stock, so this is a institutional activity. Now what I want to do is I want to clear all this out, and let's just kind of work our way down the charts here. This is the same chart, except I have this information over here where we can see the trends. You'll go back to the base chart. This information is here, just reminding you what you want to look for. This tells you what the trends are, and it also gives you the VPA flag. So now this looks totally different when we look at it with VPA flags. The first chart is just a naked chart where you have to make a determination on these factors right here, but it gives you a feel for what's going on, and then you can go in to this chart. Here's the VPA information, and the VPA flags are actually on the chart. Now you can see here how many good calls there were made with VPA. Now here, there was an effort to rise, but there had to be some news here anyway. It gapped open and shot down. And there were a lot of negative VPA flags, and there were some positive too, but the trend was obviously down on pretty heavy volatility, and then it found support in here. Now let's take it down in another chart. This is the end of day from Thursday. You can see these trends were all up, and volume was light though. You can see yesterday's volume down here in the lower right corner. So it's holding up. There aren't a lot of sellers there. Well, it was down a little bit yesterday, but it turned into a spinning top. No, this is yesterday. I'm sorry. Let me clear that out of there. Let me move in on this with alternate 1. So here is yesterday, here is today. Volume was light yesterday on this candle, but what's it doing today? Just go down to the next one, 1B, and it tells you that this is moving up. It's trading near the upper end of its range, but volume is extremely light. So what does that tell us? There's more demand than supply, and volume is really not confirming it, but there are a lot of sellers in here. Now, what are we doing up in this area here? We're getting into the resistance area. So let's just take a look at this. I should have moved that a little bit higher. I think I can do this. And that activates the line. And it has a little bit of resistance right here, but it looks like it's ready to break out now down here. I need to go back. I'm sorry about that. And draw support area. I would say there's more optimism than pessimism, but there are no unusual volume spikes except back at this area right here. Let's get rid of this. on this day here also. I'm just going to close this. Volume spike here, volume spike here. That's a volume spike too. It's a black candle, but as you can see that it closed about a third of the way up. So not a terrible candle at all. And then look how the volume has fallen off as traders have come into agreement on the relative worth of the stock. Okay, I'm going to go to number 2, alternate 2, and I'm going to go down to quickly look at the weekly chart. This is all pretty much optimism from this point on. And then I'm going to textual charts. So what do we have here? We have the industry group, which is blue, and the security's relative strength compared to the S&P is green. And you can see it was moving up here, and it's kind of underperforming the S&P right now. The industry group, it looks like it's turned back up. But as far as the fan and the other indicators, you can see the fan clearly here. Bring this back up. Get an arrow in here. Okay, here is the 200, here's the 100, here's the 50, and here's the 18. So the fan is in place. Now, when I go down to the next chart, if the closing price has dipped below the 18, and I don't think it has throughout here, then we'll get a white bar in the sea of green. But this shows you how strong this stock is just using the fan and the 3 and the 6. Everything is positive, and you can tell that right down here because here's the 3 and the 6 positive, here's the 6 and the 18 positive, and here's the 18 versus the 50. And if you go up here, you can see that all of these trends are up. Now that's not on this chart, but when I go to the next chart, my final chart, we get the visual filter back test, and you can see that the fan has been in place and the price below the 18 closed below the 18 except back here, and that was back in May of 26, and then there was a big gap up and the fan has been in place ever since. In addition to that, these green areas here, the histograms and the green areas really have nothing to do with each other. So when I click here on the last day, you can see these trends are up, up, up. So here's short-term, medium-term, and long-term trends, these green areas here. So we get a nice visual on the strengths of the best fit trends, which are linear regression trends. Sorry about that. And we have the fan, and the 3 is above the 6 most of the time. So this puts it in perspective with indicators. But my whole point of doing this is to get me and others to look at a chart. First of all, just a blank chart, and look at these different conditions right here and try to figure out by looking at the naked chart and marking it up where the trend lines are. I talked about the trend lines last time, and support and resistance, optimism, pessimism, which really could be another word for trend lines up and down. And then, of course, volatility and volume spikes. Now I'm going to just ad-lib this. Let's go to the other extremes. Let's go to micro trends up intraday. And this just means that the 3 has crossed above the 6. On the trending down, micro trend down intraday, these are stocks whose 3 is below the 6, but they could be turning up. But I'm going to go up to the micro trend up intraday. And you can see NVIDIA comes to the top here, followed by Nike and then T-Mobile. So I'm going to bring up NVIDIA. And I've got to get something out of the way here. And let's make this alternate 3 on the keys. Now look at this. This was optimism as it moved up, and then it chopped around here, moved up, got up to a new high here, and then it's really just been chopped for a long time here. Yeah, there's some pretty good price moves here. Now here was a period of optimism. I think this was going into earnings, and then after earnings, it became very volatile and headed down. Now when it's volatile like this, it's really tough to take positions and to make a buck and not get stopped out. So it's much better if you can find stocks that are tight like this, whereas most of the participating traders assume that this is a fair value on a stock and it's actually undervalued because the optimism level is high as this moves up. And then here we get into the chop where they think it's overpriced, and then we get a move up here, and that fails. And then it's just really sloppy in here and through here where traders cannot agree on the value of the stock. And then it finally breaks out of this. This would be the resistance here. And it broke past resistance, went beyond it, came back and tested it, and then went up to the top and broke out. This must have been earnings right in here. And then some traders or profit takers thought it was overpriced, and it sold off, tried to rally here, and it just kept drifting down. And in this area here, you can see there's price agreement here because it doesn't move very far. So there's somewhat of a price agreement. And now we're getting a breakout, but we're going to run into resistance right up here soon. And we'll see if I can clear this. Now let's drop down here. And you can see that the VPA flags become very useful because they give us a lot of information that we don't see in the naked chart. It's not always correct, but it can be very helpful. Here's a test, here's a test, here's a test. Here's a confirmation of that test. It moved up. Test, confirmed it, didn't go very far. Another test, another test. These magenta triangles are all tests, but at least it gives us a feel for what these individual candles or even multiple candles tell us. Now, this was an excellent move right here. Strength seen returning after a downtrend, effort to rise bullish. And then here's a test, confirmation of that test, and then we had the nice run up to here, pullback, another test, strength seen returning after a downtrend, and it had another nice move up. This was a gap up, looked like it was going to go to the moon, and traders started selling it the next day. Now here's some nice negative VPA flags, but down in here where we were getting some price agreement, you can see that there's a test, a confirmation of that test, and it's starting to move up. Here's an effort to rise. This right here was a no demand, a sign of weakness, just because of very light volume. Okay, want to go back up and clear all this out. Clear all annotations. So here's the intraday today. Even though there is a major candle, you can see that volume is running below average as we go into the close on Friday. Weekly, not going to spend any time on that. The context, what's positive about it? Well, the VPOC turned positive here right after those VPA flags. But if you use a VPOC indicator as a guide for volatility, it really can show you when a chart or a stock has been extremely volatile and unsure of its movement. And then the 3 was below the 6 all through here. 1, 2, 3 days ago, it crossed over, and the short-term trend is still negative, as is the intermediate-term trend. Now let's go to the final chart, and you can see that there is no fan in place right now. There was at this point, but then the price dropped down below the 18, so it became a white area. Let me move in on this. Not only did it drop below the 18, it dropped below the, below the 18 right here, I guess. Well, the easy way to tell is to look over here. It's actually below the 18 or above the 18 yesterday, but below the 50. So it has to be above all 3 of these exponential averages to have a green fan. This box over here only reflects the last day. But let's see if I can do this here, alternate I. Let's go here and let's click on this back on April 24th. If you look down here, it's above the 1850, 100, and 200. The fan is up. VBF, visual filter, back test is true. So all the conditions are met, and that's why we have the green. Now, when I click over to here, you can see the VFB is false. Okay, I've thrown a lot at you. I don't know if I was coherent enough or not, but anyway, I think it's a good idea to work through these charts when you're getting serious about spending money on a stock. If it's in a pessimism run, you really don't want to buy it. If it's coming off of support and turning optimistic, and especially if you get a volume spike, then you really want to consider getting it. Now here's NVIDIA with just a basic chart. Looks totally different, doesn't it? Anyway, that's it for this week. Have a good week, and I should be back next week with another video. If you have questions, just let me know. Thank you.